Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Monday at about 8:47. Hope everyone's doing good. So this weekend, again, like I've always said, and I've talked to always, I've always mentioned it. Um, but I watch movies all the time. I watch usually average at least one movie a day or at night. And weekends or so, occasionally I will not watch a movie at night, but it's pretty rare. I always say it's for me, especially if it's at the end of a pretty busy day. It's for me, it's the best way to unwind and to kind of decompress from the day and to just kind of unwind, and it puts me probably in the most like relaxing state. So it's just something I do, and plus I just really enjoy it. And then there's like times where I'll like go balls deep and I'll watch a whole ton of movies. Like three or four movies back to back, or two movies a night, or three movies, in one sitting. And I'll just get really revved up into doing that. And yesterday, or I should say, this weekend was one of those weekends. I watched a shit ton of movies, so it was great. And I watched a lot of different kinds of movies. And overall, I'd have to say I was pretty disappointed with some of the movies. Kind of underwhelmed. I I've been doing these shows of where I've been covering all the movies that I bought from that big sale that I went to last month at Opera House Video. So I'm still doing that. I have plenty of more reviews to come and videos to come with around those videos and those reviews. So it's been a lot of fun. I have lucked out in that department as far as getting getting my hands on some really great films. So those are still coming down the pike. And then over the weekend I went to Opera House Video to rent a handful of some new movies. I try to, my whole thing is movies from the 70s, 60s, and 80s. That's like especially the 70s. That's my favorite decade of all time. That's my go to. But at the same time, I try to stay, contemporary. I try to stay, with my head to the ground on the pulse of like what's coming out, what's new, what's new in the world of horror, or in general movies, just new movies that come out, but especially around horror films. So I try to, always keep that as a thing. A lot of the times, the one big difference now is because of my movie watching habits and the way the movies are released now. It's very different because of streaming. So a lot of the times there are movies that sometimes get very limited releases in the theater, or there have been examples of where certain films have not been in the theaters at all. And so by the time I get to see them, and it feels like forever until the movie will actually come out to where you can rent it. Two examples of that would be the Hellraiser remake, which came out last year, and also the movie Prey, which is the newest edition in the uh, Predator franchise. I just did a show on that. I finally just saw that movie the other day. Super awesome movie. One of my favorite movies I've seen this year. So it takes me. I notice when I watch new movies now, I do still see them obviously, but there's a long gap of time until I can actually see them. One movie I've been wanting to see, and I still have no idea if it's ever going to be available in any kind of physical form or even to rent, is a movie called Barbarian, which is closing in on a year and a half now, and that I've heard that movie is incredible, pretty much across the board for the most part, and from people that I actually know. but still haven't seen it just because I have no idea what it's in this limbo. Same thing happened with Prey, which was a movie I've been wanting to see. Probably for me, as far as seeing a new movie, that was probably I don't know. It kind of was the most anticipated movie for me to see, and yet I had to wait and wait and wait. So did everybody else, to where it was finally announced that it was going to be put out in physical on a in a physical format. So now you can rent it. For people who know what that is, probably don't, but you can actually buy it now on Blu-ray, 4K, DVD, or whatever. So, and I think it was due to that movie was really successful when it came out. It was huge, and it was only online, but it made from what I gather, it made a shit ton of money. It was a very successful movie. It had a lot of great acclaim to it, and finally saw it this weekend, and I have to say, check out the review for it. I just posted it all over the place. So and I have to say that it's totally worth all the hype. I thoroughly enjoyed that movie. And so, any other thing that happens too with these days in these different times that we live in, especially in the age of the YouTube age, and with social media, it obviously is a much bigger factor as far as it's such a big component of entertainment now that I think it really can determine the outcome of a certain film, as far as success goes, or a band is putting out a new album or what have you. There's so much attention thrown onto certain things that come out, and I see it now really affecting. There's tons of examples of that in the movie world, of where, for good or bad, probably mostly in a negative light, meaning that it does directly affect a film and can cause the or contribute to the failure of a certain movie. It really, social media really, I feel, has a huge impact on just movies that come out on a weekly basis. It really affects the film box office now, more so than ever. I almost think more so than critics, than regular professional critics who make a living doing it. So it's very different. It's a very different time, and in some ways, like anything, that's a really good thing, and then also I think it's kind of a negative thing. But one of the trends I see now is like a lot of movies that come out, especially newer films, and especially around horror films, is that like you have like two sides of the coin, where some people will come out and say, and it can be anybody. It can be people who are just, any Joe Schmo out there that has a computer. Well, people like me, that might not necessarily have, that kind of unspoken credential to really be talking about something that they kind of claim to know about. Everybody. So it comes to that scenario of like everybody and their grandmother all of a sudden is a critic. On one hand, it's really great because you have the people who are really passionate, about what they feel, and they might actually have some legitimacy because it is something that they do, and it is a knowledge that they know, that they do have. But and one thing I see now is that there are so many movies that come out that are either acclaimed to across the boards by people on social media, especially YouTube, where they'll say this is the scariest movie ever made, the best movie since The Exorcist, or better than The Exorcist, the greatest movie ever made. And it's like, on one extreme you have that where a lot of movies that come out, it's it's so like over the top as far as praise for a film. And then on the other side of the coin, you have people who are saying it's, the biggest disappointment. It's it's the worst movie in the franchise. It's an atrocity. It's hard. I find for me, as a fan of films and who likes to check out reviews and to get a sense of what a movie might be. Um, I find it's really hard to find people out there talking about something from the perspective of like kind of being in the middle, where they can, be pretty fair and honest and open minded, and yet criticize something and not necessarily go, into the avenue of this is the greatest movie ever made, or this is the biggest piece of crap ever made. Sometimes, certain films have that where they are very, very, very good. And sometimes, obviously, you have films that are very, very bad and very poorly conceived, obviously. But it just seems now everything is so, I don't know, headline driven now. So people use these tags or these ways of describing their videos to garner interest. And it's, I think a lot of the times it's not about the film. It's about obviously just trying to get traction on YouTube, get people to comment, get people to like and subscribe. And I feel like that has become the kind of the new normalcy as far as how people, you know, put out their opinions on a lot of things. There's, and I think in a lot of ways it seems to be more in that kind of vicinity. It's a weird time that way. Overall, I think in some ways it's better, but again, it's a tricky thing. So today's show is on a movie that came out, that is actually came out in 2022. It came out last year. I just got it on Blu-ray actually, and it's this newer horror film called Talk to Me. And this movie was a movie again that was incredibly praised and incredibly hyped. I've heard about this movie for like a good solid year, and a lot of people saying, and it has gotten some really great reviews. Um, Basically, saying that this film is one of the scariest movies that's come out in recent time, and even going as far as saying it's a classic horror film. It's one of the scariest movies ever, and it's gotten so much praise from what I gather across the board. A really, really hyped movie, and something that everyone needs to see. And it's an A24 film, and A24, of course, is a real big kind of powerhouse in the world of indie filmmaking, especially horror films. I think A24 has a mixed bag. It's a massive company. I like some of their films quite a bit that they get behind. One of the cool things, probably the coolest thing about A24, they have a pretty good track record for the most part, but they definitely showcase directors and films and filmmakers with these ideas that are, for the most part, pretty original. And they also, I think A24 does take chances with the movies that they put out. They're a lot of them are not typically films that you would see by the big Hollywood studios. So they are, if at the heart of things, they are like an independent film company. They have grown to be, I think now, a major company. But they definitely show movies and get behind movies that, in some lights, as far as commerciality of a film, marketability, the way you market a film, films that could be looked at as a risk. So they do take chances, and I think that is pretty awesome, and that is very commendable. And they do have a pretty diverse track record as far as the kinds of films that they put out. They mostly do horror films. I will. Most of the films they have done are definitely horror oriented films, and there are some in their world that are very very good, and some that are kind of mixed. But I do like them, and when A24 does put out a new movie, I definitely it gets my attention. So Talk to Me was apparently directed by two guys or two YouTubers, Danny Filippo and Michael Filippo, two brothers, who I guess apparently have a or a YouTube channel where they review movies, and they basically directed these two movies, and it came out July 28th 2023, and essentially this movie is a possession movie. So I've been hearing a lot about this film. The cast for this film is actually pretty good. It's pretty solid. Um, Again, lots of actors and actresses I've never seen before. Sophia Wilde, Zoe Tarakis, Miranda Otto, Joe Bird, Chris Alonso, Otis Genji, all pretty, as far as I know, at least from what I gather, actors and actresses I've never seen before. But this movie has been hyped as being one of the greatest horror movies to come out in recent time. The best movie of the year I've seen thrown around in the horror genre, and one of the scariest movies ever made. So I sat down and I got it the other night at Opera House Video. I got this Blu-ray copy of it, and I have to say that this movie is pretty overly hyped. I think I was really, to be totally honest, the actual technical side of these two brothers who made this film, it does look good. It's pretty well put together. It feels like, you know, an independent film, but it has, obviously a smaller budget, but they utilized their finances, so the movie does have a lot of pop, and it does have a lot of command. But as far as a horror film and as being yet another movie about demonic possession, I just feel like this movie was so overly hyped, and I was really, in all honesty, I was really let down. In all actuality, I did not make it all the way through this movie. This movie made me think a lot about another movie that came out last year that was so hyped, and I was so utterly disappointed with it. And that was a movie called Smile, which, again, face value is a pretty good movie, but that movie was such, in every way, shape, and form, a disappointment because it was such a ripoff of It Follows, which I think is a really fantastic horror film that came out quite a few years ago. And it was a newer horror film that came out with a real fresh, innovative approach to horror. Smile, I feel, just literally and in one of the most obvious ways possible, just ripped off that movie so much and tried to replicate that framework. And it was just a hollow experience and just so incredibly disappointing. Talk to Me, I think, is a movie that it's a horror movie that I just feel is just not scary at all. I don't think it has any aspects of it that I feel are even really creepy. It's a weird thing. Um, and the biggest thing about this film, it's essentially about these teenagers. It takes place in Australia, and it's about these group of teenagers that play this game where they one of the kids has this hand that is supposedly a severed hand of somebody who was involved with witchcraft, and they do these kind of fun party gatherings or kind of ritualistic gatherings of where they they bust out this hand and they egg each other on to basically engage with this hand, and that it can open up these gates or another portal to to where demons can take possession of that person. That's the basic kind of premise of this movie. And I feel like this movie just didn't have really any atmosphere. I didn't feel like I was being pulled in. I did not think this movie was creepy or scary or even tension filled in really any way, shape, or form. It was weird. The thing about this film, the lead character in this movie, again, and a lot of from a technical side and from a direction standpoint, this movie is technically well done. The some of the dialogue, especially in the beginning of the film, where you're kind of getting a gist and you're getting to know some of these kids, it's pretty. The dialogue is pretty interesting. I like the pace of it. It's kind of realistic to a degree. It does have some cool things. It does feel like this movie was done in a very professional way, where it does feel like a film, and so in that regard, it's kind of commendable. The lead role, who is played by the lead character Mia, played by Sophie Wilde, she's kind of the centerpiece of this whole movie. The thing about this movie that I just took me out of it and caused me to kind of get frustrated, and I felt really aggravated when I watched it, and ultimately caused me to not finish this movie. I got probably this movie's like about 2 hours or so, and I was in to it from I made it through maybe about 65, 70 minutes into it, maybe a little less. And I finally got I felt so frustrated and kind of aggravated that I couldn't watch it anymore, and I took it out. And, that doesn't happen to me too often. When it does, it says something to me. And again, this is just my opinion, but it really speaks volumes to me when I react that way to a film, and where it puts me in a bad mood, and I'm just like, I have more questions than answers. The thing about this film, the biggest problem that I have to say that I had with Talk to Me is the main character, played by Sophie Wilde, and she's the central character of it. And obviously, this film deals with the main kind of thing that this film, I think, deals with is about grief, the loss of people we love, and how we deal with it. I think that's kind of the general synopsis of it, and where that can take us if we hold on to grief, and how we let it, how we go through that process. It seems like that's the general kind of gist of the storyline. But the thing that was so frustrating about this movie, and again, Sophie Wilde, the lead character, she's in like every scene of this movie. She's a good actress. I've never seen her before. I think she's a pretty solid actress, actually pretty good actress. But the biggest problem that I had with this film that took me out of the movie, like I'm kind of into it. I was kind of into it for a while. I was interested. I thought this is kind of interesting. I kind of want to see where this goes. And then I had an experience of where, bam, I felt like, oh, I'm kind of derailed. And then I sat with it again, and I found myself so many times having that experience of where I was kind of into it, and then the train would go off the tracks again. I kept feeling I was, as a viewer, getting derailed. So I felt like once I was taken out of the movie for that fourth or fifth time, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And then that was it for me. the thing that probably the biggest thing for me at face value that I can think of that I had a problem with this movie that caused that reaction is kind of the tone of this film and the the reaction of certain events that these characters have and the kind of emotional thing that they go through. I just found it really taxing and something that just kept happening and it just took me out of the movie. Meaning that, like, on one hand, there are characters in this movie, and especially around the lead character, played by Sophie Wilde, where there are moments in this film where she is literally gripped in complete and utter mortal terror. And then 2 seconds later, there is this tone shift to her character of where she is all of a sudden carefree and incredibly happy and joyous and in this incredibly silly, goofy mood. After kind of going through this experience of where it literally would, in a normal situation would shake someone to their core, and it would cause them to probably act a different way. And there are scenes in this film of where there's the initial possession scene, and I felt like the other thing with this film is there's like a brief introduction to all of these characters, and then it's like green light go, and then suddenly okay you're into the first sequence where there's the first possession sequence, and I felt like visually it was kind of cool. It's kind of well directed, but I felt like there was no build up to that point. I felt like there was no atmosphere and there was no suspense. It was just like, okay, here we go. We're going to introduce these characters and it's pretty interesting. And then we're going to go into the area of where we're going to be getting into what this film was about. And it just felt so abrupt and so quick that I felt there was no tension to getting to that point. I didn't really care about the characters all that much. I kind of actually thought that they were kind of annoying, and I didn't really care about them. There were so many characters, and there was no tension. There was no atmosphere to where I was there was no build up to that area. And during these first possession sequences, there are I just generally think the design and the design of these like demons or these ghosts are not very good. I just felt like there's no real tension at all. There's one sequence in it that's pretty disturbing, kind of weird, kind of funny, but I wasn't really emotionally invested even in that. And then like the tone of it shifts multiple times of where suddenly all the kids, the characters themselves that are going through this game are interacting and playing this game, or which they're addressing it as a game. They're obviously becoming possessed by these demons, and there are these minutes of where everybody is gripped in complete and utter mortal terror, and as the viewer, and you see it on the faces and the characters, and it feels like it's so obvious in the story that these kids have opened up a portal to another dimension, and they are truly being possessed by these demons. And then 2 seconds later, it cuts into where it's them basically playing beer pong, and they think it's just funny, and that there isn't any there isn't any weight being carried over into the ramifications of, well, fuck, we've actually been in communication and we are actually being possessed by these demons, of where this is a real thing. This isn't trickery. This isn't pulling a rabbit out of a hat. No, like, this is actually happening. So what do you do in those circumstances? But it doesn't do that. It becomes this thing of where the tone just keeps shifting, and it doesn't, to me, it just takes me out of the movie. And it just that's the main thing for me around this movie, where that situation just keeps happening over and over again. And and the other thing is the atmosphere. There's no slow or even a build up to moving into these sequences of the possession. I just feel like there's no atmosphere. Recently, I just watched and I did a review on the first Conjuring, and then I also did very even more recently. I did a show on the new Predator movie, Prey, and those movies, and especially Conjuring because that is a possession movie. That movie has such a rich atmosphere and a real creepy, legitimately scary aesthetic or environment that the movie creates. But it pulls like watching that movie, and I realistically think that the first Conjuring is the best possession movie that's come out since The Exorcist. There's literally a billion movies that have come out that are in that genre, and there are some films that are really great in regards to that. Another one that I think is kind of a masterpiece is Hereditary, but The Conjuring deals directly with that kind of you know invocation of demons or the possession of legitimate demons, and I feel like that movie is one of the scariest, if not the scariest movies, or the one of the best, if not the best modern movie about possession since the original Exorcist. Like that movie, I've seen that movie many times. I watched it again recently, and the movie just has such a great thing of where it pulls you in, and before you are having these horrific experiences, as well as the characters. And when the characters in those movies realize what's going on, they are motivated to try to figure out what's going on and to try to protect themselves, to try to survive. There isn't this tonal shift of where suddenly they're taking themselves out of that. And but it just has that atmosphere of where it pulls you in. And I feel like Talk to Me doesn't have that. It doesn't have any of that rich atmosphere, and does not lead you into these series of events of what the movie is about. I just feel like it's one, two, three, go. The introduction is kind of cool and interesting, but once it gets to the horror elements, and it's so overt, and it's the tone of the film that really does it for me. So at the end of the day, I would say don't believe the hype on this film. It's definitely, since that movie Smile that I talked about, it is the most overly hyped film that I know of. And I could go into other areas of why I didn't like this film, but the main thing for me is that the tonal approach, the kind of the arc of the story, the arc of the characters, especially around the lead character, her general reaction to how she, you know, deals with what's going on, and it just doesn't. And the other thing about and again, it's all about the tone. The I feel like the emotional things of where they try to take the characters, everything from where they're suddenly incredibly scared and terrified to where they are just being silly teenagers to where they are talking about more serious subjects, especially when it comes to their family. It feels like everything is so it's so I don't know, over the top. There's no like subtlety, and I feel like it's also unrealistic. I don't think people, and obviously this is a work of fiction, but I don't think people in the sense of reality. I don't think people don't react to things like this that way in any way. I feel like all of that emotional reaction to all of the things in the film is so heightened, and it's kind of unrealistic. Getting back to tone and tonal shift, I talked about Hereditary, Ari Aster's film, which I think is an amazing. I think that movie's a masterpiece. Even The Conjuring. But getting back to Hereditary, that movie is centered on a family, and really the mother's dynamic with her daughter, or the daughter's dynamic with her dealing with the loss of her mother. And that movie's really about grief, but it's really a melodrama. It's really about family, even though it's kind of a terrifying movie, or it is a terrifying movie. Um, the general way of how people react in that film is how I think, in regards to how we kind of carry ourselves, is how the common folk like me or just regular or anybody kind of react. There is that air of like it has, even though it's a piece of fiction and it's a horror movie and it's in the land of make believe, it has a practicality as far as how people kind of react, and how they problem solve, or how they interact with their friends, their family. It has that kind of realistic, grounded thing about it. It's not overly hyped. It's not overly people's reactions are how they just generally are. It's not they're not revved up for the sake of making it theatrical. People react a certain way, and usually in a quieter way, and I feel like, well, like Hereditary, that is the example of that. Like it has a very realistic thing, even though it's a work of fiction, on just how everyday people react to situations. And I feel like Talk to Me doesn't have that at all. The emotional tone is really, I feel like, purposely cranked up, where it's just, no, people are not going to react that way. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So, I I definitely think that this movie is, from what I've come across, as far as newer horror films, the most overly hyped movie I've seen. I don't even know if I wouldn't even recommend this film, to be honest. I couldn't get through it. Um, I don't understand the hype around it, but it is what it is. From a direction standpoint, and as it being technically a film, it's pretty well done. But I want a horror film that is creepy, atmospheric, and actually scary, and takes me to a different place. And I hate to say it, but this movie is not one of those movies. So, thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.